Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And I'm very intrigued with this interview. I came across Dr. Leah Kaylor actually speaking to an agent who suggested her as a potential guest for the podcast. And I looked at her website and I was fascinated by what she does, which was something I was not familiar with, which she does forensic assessments and evaluations. And she's written several articles about pertaining to sexual abuse and predators and how assessments kind of fit into that. Um, but she's been doing this for several years, and it's her passion, her career. I'll have her website attached underneath this so that you can look at her articles if you'd like, as well as further information about her. But I just looked at this and I was like, I really don't know much about this field at all or what that involves. And so I thought, you know what? This would be really interesting for people and interesting for me to learn. So she is here with us today. So, Dr. Kaylor, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm very, very passionate about forensics, so I'm happy to be here and to answer your questions and hopefully give your listeners some education.
So, to kind of start out, I I think it takes a special person, and I mean this in a good way, to want to go into forensics because I think it is most people I know when you talk about forensics, the kind of the idea with because we're not very educated on it is like, ooh, that's kind of scary and like that's gonna involve a lot of stuff and that might be traumatic for me and or all of that. And so I really don't know anyone very well, if anybody, who's gone into the forensics field. Um, and it's kind of, it's all associated with spy things and creepy stuff and all this stuff. But it's obviously very important and essential to what we do in the legal system that you are used to be able to do these evaluations for different types of people. What kind of got you into forensics? Did you want to do this since you were a kid, or was this something that in college you became interested in, or?
That's a great question. I did not start out thinking that this was what my career was going to be. I thought I was going to go into medicine. Quick funny story. In high school, I had to do a shadowing experience. Everybody did. And you had to pick a career that you were interested in and see if they would allow you to shadow for a day. And I got hooked up with a surgeon and I was allowed to go in and observe a reconstructive knee surgery. And I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest. Like, I'm going to have the coolest project in my whole class. And I'm in there. I'm like fully gowned up. I am in the operating room. We're jamming to music. Like power tools are going off because we were doing a knee replacement. And I'm fine. And then all of a sudden, like a piece of bone like flips up onto the gown of the surgeon. And I'm like, I don't feel so good. And then
Oh
I wake up in
no.
the nurse's office and it's a whole thing. So very, very early on, I knew that medicine was probably not going to work out for me and I needed to figure something else out. So I took some classes in psychology in high school and then in my undergraduate, and I was just very attracted to forensic psychology. And I think that that's normal. That's very trendy right now. And it was when I was in college. And I had a very unique opportunity in undergrad. Again, it was shadowing, but a little bit more than that. It was an internship. And I got a chance to do this where my mom works, and she works at a maximum security all male prison in Pennsylvania. And there's a death row. And so I had the opportunity, and I think it very much has to do with her having the connections on the inside to be able to go and spend time. I spent about 6 weeks there with the psychiatrist and the psychologist, just spending time with the inmates, getting a chance to see very active psychosis, very serious mental illness, getting a chance to sit in on therapy groups that were happening. And those groups
Wow.
were, yeah, all different types of things. Like some of them were called Thinking for a Change. So, like people who are getting ready to be re released into the community, how do we very effectively reintegrate you? There were substance use groups. So, kind of thinking about, is this something that you'd like to continue or hopefully not whenever you get into the outside? But the one that really struck me the most was the sex offender group. And that was one of the many that I got a chance to sit in on and like co-facilitate as much as I possibly could as an undergrad. And so while I was doing the internship shadowing experience as an undergrad, I was like, wow, this is so incredibly interesting. However, I am not, I know that this isn't going to be a career for me. Being in the prison every single day for those short 6 weeks, I knew that I did not want a career every day where I was going to be in a prison because my physiology was just very activated being in there. And I knew that this wasn't going to be sustainable. So I kind of felt like a failure. I was very upset with myself. And I told my mom, this is so frustrating. Like I thought that this was the career that I wanted. And she said to me, Leah, it is so important knowing what you don't want to do as much as what you do want to do.
Hmm.
And I'm like, all right, I'll take this information. So what do I do with it next? And I decided to go to John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and I got my master's there in forensic mental health counseling, and just had an opportunity to do more forensic work, but it was in a different context. So I wasn't in a prison anymore. The few, again, like shadowing, internship, hands-on experiences that I got a chance to do there were going into the court system, and oftentimes I don't want to say this always because I can't give that like blanket statement, but oftentimes in a courthouse there are secure areas where, and they're normally very very small, where a psychologist or like a small team can go in and evaluate a person who is being, there's some type of question as to their psychological fitness to stand trial, or maybe there's a question of malingering, there could be a question of not guilty by reason of insanity. And so I got a chance to observe a lot of those, and that was really interesting to me. And I'm like, okay, this feels more in alignment with what it is that I can do. I can still be part of forensics, but it is a short interview with the individual in a very small enclosed space, and then I go back to my office and I do all of the report writing and make a determination as to what I think is going on with this individual, and then I submit it to the court. So that was a big piece of my getting into forensics. And then to continue to tell you a very long story, I did my PhD at St. Louis University in clinical psychology. And there I got a chance to start doing therapy one on one with individuals who had been sexually abused, whether that
Hmm.
was as an adult or as a child. And so, again, I'm still in the forensic world, but it's another different element and another different layer. And so I took a postdoc for a very short time after my PhD graduation. And it was all about sexually violent predators. And this is not something that a lot of states have. There's actually only a handful of states that have sexually violent predators. And these individuals are folks who have committed some type of sex crime. By the legal language of their particular state, they have some type of what they call mental defect. And then based on the evaluation, and that was what I was learning how to do, was we believe that this individual will commit another crime and they are too dangerous to be let out into society. So these are very, very high stakes evaluations. And it's not taken lightly. There's a ton that goes into it as far as record review, getting in touch with the providers who have worked with that individual, and then making a determination if after they have completed their prison sentence, can they be released back into the community, or are they at a level of dangerousness that we need to civilly commit them?
Hmm.
And that's a huge decision to make, civil commitment, because even though they're going to another facility and that's not considered a jail or a prison, it still very much mimics that. And then those individuals have the opportunity to be evaluated annually to determine if there has been enough change, if they can be released, or if they need to be held for another year. And we can continue to do that year after year after year. And there are some people who spend the majority of their life civilly committed based on how risky we believe that they are. So I did that for a short period of time. And then I got an offer to join the FBI. And so I immediately left my postdoc and joined the FBI to become a psychologist. So
Wow.
it's been a long but very exciting road.
Yeah, and I mean, I was gonna say, I mean, they're all kind of connected. It's not like they was like
Oh,
jumping from really different things. Um,
absolutely. It's all forensics, and there's always been some type of thread of sexual abuse.
Okay, so you currently work for the FBI now.
I do. And everything that I'm going to share with you today, which won't be a whole lot about the FBI, but nonetheless, everything that I'm going to talk about is my own thoughts, opinions, beliefs, biases, whatnot.
Yeah. So I did want to ask you for that time that you were in prison because I mean, what an opportunity
Yes.
to be able to, I mean, I don't think to meet people on death row. I mean, that's incredible. Like just that experience.
Yes.
Did that 6 weeks of because I think it's really easy for us to think, wow, like those people are just there's another subhumanity to it. You know, it's like I would never do that. So the idea of someone being on death row, like there's this huge disconnect between us and them. And I wondered, you being there, talking, seeing, observing, um, did it change at all your view on humanity or just did that affect your worldview at all? Like just being able to listen to these individuals talk, knowing about the crimes they had committed. Um, because I just can't help but think that must have impacted you in some way. 6 weeks of just seeing this over and over again. Like you said, obviously this wasn't something you decided you wanted to do full time, which I can totally understand. I
Right.
don't think I could do it. Um, but what was that like?
I would say the 6 weeks was long and short. I don't know that it necessarily changed my worldview, but I do think that it was an amazing introduction to the level of trauma that we as a society endure. And then when we are traumatized, how that impacts our behaviors, the way that we think, the way that we treat others. And I think that you hear the saying, hurt people hurt people. And I think that that is probably really what it is that I saw when I was there is just this level of trauma to the extreme. And so I don't think that that changed my worldview, but I will say, having been in the world of forensics as a psychologist and now as a prescribing psychologist for over 6 years, I do think that my worldview has changed to being very cautious and having this
Hmm,
sneak peek behind the scenes of this seedy underbelly that there are some people who it, it's incredible what they will inflict on another person.
hmm,
And I think just being more cautious than the average person because I have this knowledge. And I think that's a combination of from my time in prison, doing forensic evaluations, doing therapy with folks who have been sexually abused. So I think it's a combination of everything. And the research too, a lot of that I've done. So I would say just being really immersed in this world for half a decade, or yeah, half a decade, has made me way more cautious than the normal person. And just to give you an example of, if someone has a new baby and they put pictures on Facebook, I'm like, oh, I would never do that if that was my own child, because I just know that there are folks out there who are interested in seeing those photos and not for the excitement of that person giving birth and having a new baby.
sure. And like that that is an example with the baby. There are others that are like affect your daily life that maybe like are you more when it comes to friendships or relationships with people, are you much more does it take longer for you to trust someone?
Oh, that's a good question. And I would say I haven't really sat down and thought about it, but I would say that there probably are certain contexts where, yes, maybe I do have a lot more walls up than other people. I would say for me, I do not have any children. I've always known that I didn't want children, and this was way back before I ever did any of these forensic experiences. That just isn't something that interests me personally. But I think that if I were to have children, my worldview and the way that it impacts me would be significantly different. Again, just because of all the exposure that I've had.
So in the sense of you think you would be a very, oh, and I say this not, and it sounds negative, but do you think you would be prone to be more overprotective with your kids?
Yes, I think so. Just questioning the motives of everyone around them and
Yeah.
teachers, scout leaders, coaches. I think that because of all the knowledge that I have, I would be very skeptical of anyone who would want to spend time with my child, want to be nice to them, have any reason to touch them, like I said, in like some type of coaching way. I think that that would significantly impact me. And I
Hmm.
think that a lot of folks, whether that's law enforcement or anybody who has had similar experiences to me, would probably tell you that uh, if they are parents, that's how they operate, and that their house is the house for sleepovers, and that they are very, very involved because they know the dangers, and they've had that sneak peek behind the curtain of some of the evils that go on in this world.
Has it made you think pretty low of mankind in general?
Oh goodness. That's a great question. And I don't want to say that. I don't want, I think that that's a really important piece of doing, because I'll also call this trauma work, right? Like when I'm working with people, especially if I'm the therapist and we're doing trauma work and therapy around processing the trauma that has happened to them, or if I'm the evaluator and I'm evaluating children who have been sexually abused and I need to like give that report to the court and let them know what needs to happen next. And so I think that there has to be a lot of self-awareness about burnout and being careful that the world, I don't think that the world is absolutely terrible. I do think that there's lots of good things and a lot of good people out there. And I think that when terrible things happen, there's a lot of spotlight on it. And it's important that there's a spotlight on it, right? Because I think that there's so many people who are abused and then they try to come forward and they're not believed, whether that's not being believed by their family or by law enforcement or by organizations, and when you're trying to tell your chain of command or something along those lines. So I think that a lot of importance whenever it comes to highlighting these things, but I think that there's been a lot of highlighting in that sometimes it overshadows the good, and that there is good in this world, and I don't want to believe that the the evil outweighs the good. I think that sometimes it just depends on where your spotlight is. And whenever I think about trauma work and all the work that I do, like I said, being very self-aware, sometimes I can have like these glasses on that I see the world through a different perspective. And I have to be aware of like, hey, Leah, not everything is like this. You need to take these glasses off and you need to experience life sometimes like the people who are blissfully unaware. And I think that there's something very nice about that. And it would be nice to be able to experience that. But it's also important to
Hmm.
be very educated and know. So, like, finding that balance wherever possible,
Yeah, but
if
for
that's possible.
you, I would think for you too, though, like just in your average everyday life, do you find how do you kind of turn off that aspect when you're like clocking out? Like do you, because you probably see and hear things that some of us will never see and hear, which is probably
Yes.
good, like you said. Um, and I mean, I feel like, because I have trauma in my life. I have a counselor, and I don't understand how she talks to 40 people a week. I don't. I feel like my problems are so enough. I'm like, how do you keep just listening to everyone's problems? And then she's really good. She'll keep living, and she'll be very happy, and she'll be very present at different things that she does, and it just doesn't negatively impact her to the point where she's totally paralyzed or like that's all she's thinking about. Like she does have boundaries for her life. And I don't know, how does that work if you're experiencing and hearing about such painful things and not get just so sad?
You make a great point. And in my short 5-ish, 6-ish years as a psychologist and doing a lot of this work, there are times where I think, like, you really couldn't surprise me. Like, I've heard so much, you couldn't surprise me. And that's really sad, A. But I think that there's some. there's something very special about people who can do that, like what you talked about your therapist does, like seeing 40 clients a week. I don't do that. And I know that about myself, and I've known that for a very long time, is that I'm not built to see clients day in and day out. And that's what's very beautiful about my position is that there are opportunities to go and do other things like education or find people referral resources or just to spice things up and do some like different variety. So I know that that's very important to me, but also self care. And like you said, boundaries are very, very important. So, whenever, I, and it's a skill, and I think that some days I'm better at it than others, but trying my best whenever I leave work to leave work at work. And I know there are some of my fellow psychologists have some symbolic things that they do. Like some people, whether they need to or not, at the end of the day, will go and wash their hands. And that's kind of a symbolic I'm washing off the day, I'm washing
Hmm.
off this trauma residue, and I'm leaving. So I think that there are certain things that people do to try to leave work at work. And I think that it's also important that when you get home, that your life is you do things that are joyful for you, you do things that fill up your own cup and and that's going to look different for everyone, right? Like for some people that may look like going home and listening to a podcast about murder. Okay. Or, maybe it just looks like going home and playing with your dog and like cooking some delicious food. It really just depends because I think that yeah, whatever it is that speaks to you and whatever it is that fills up your cup is going to be unique and you've got to figure that out. And then also one thing that I think is really important is having more tools in your toolkit than you think that you need because, I see a lot of people and I'm like, "Okay, so what's your coping skills?" And they're like, "Exercise." I'm like, "Great. What else you got?" Nothing else, just exercise. And so, say for example, God forbid you get an injury. You can't exercise anymore
Right.
and there goes your coping skills right out the window. So you need to have lots of different skills in your toolkit to be able to pull out whenever the situation is appropriate. So I would say more than anything else, self-care, being aware, having boundaries, and trying to leave work at work.
What do you do? What's your favorite way to kind of unwind at the end of a day?
My dog, Stella, she's
Yeah.
she's a lovely baby angel, and just as all dogs are, and that they are so incredibly happy to see you at the end of the day when you come home. And it just, no matter how crap your day was or what you've heard or what you've seen, that she is this shining light of unconditional love. And so getting a chance to spend time with her is definitely my number one.
And do you talk to her about your day?
Oh, I talk to her all the time. I don't necessarily tell her about my day. More than anything else, I'll ask her how her day was. And I sing to her and I just say like
Yeah.
nonsense things to her, like kind of like if she were a baby. But no, I don't normally tell her about my day so much. But yeah, we will talk and we'll look out the window together because that's one of her favorite things, or we'll go on walks. I live in a place where I have a lot of space, so she goes outside and I call it unstructured puppy time. And we just go outside and we do whatever we feel like. And it's just really lovely to watch this joy that is Stella.
Yeah, I mean, I have a cat, Knightley is his name, and he's a very emotional cat. I guess tuxedo cats are supposed to be more dog-like in general, so he's a very
Oh, okay.
emotional cat. And I talk to him and sing to him, like you said, and it's probably pathetic if people are watching, but I like emotional support
I
animals are
think there's a
so
lot of us.
real. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like such a real experience. If you haven't had it, you don't understand. But as soon as you do, like you never want to go back because it's just like incredible. Um, when you, I was gonna ask when you started this, what really surprised you about your job? Like, was there something that hit you that you were like, wow, I didn't think this was going to be something I would ever like hit you by surprise? Because obviously going into it, you knew there would be things you'd hear and see that would be really hard. But was there something that was especially surprising for you?
I think I would zoom out and just reflect on all of my time as a psychologist and say what has surprised me the most would be the sheer number of people who have had some type of unwanted sexual contact. That's what I would say.
Hmm.
Whether it is children, whether it's adults, whether it's people who have been offended against more than once. I think that the we don't have a good grasp on the full number of people, because I would say that there have been many times where people come into my therapy room and, hey, I've never told anybody this before. And oftentimes, like, I am the bearer of holding that news and creating a safe space for them to be able to share what they've been holding in, oftentimes for decades.
Hmm. What is a common trend that you see with sexual assault victims or sexual abuse victims? Is there something common that you see that, not that their story is common, because obviously it's unique for them, but is there something particular that you see that just seems to be a common trend, either in reaction or in lifestyle, current lifestyle, or just something that you see kind of across the board that isn't as surprising as you see each person?
One thing, and this goes back to some of the research that I've done with my colleagues at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. One of the research studies that we did there was looking at individuals who are interested in contacting children online for the purposes of sexual contact. And we were trying to figure out, okay, why, like, what about these children? What is it that are attracting offenders, that it's like, okay, this is the kid. And the thing that I remember in this article is a couple years old now at this point, but it was that the children, in some way, shape, or form, were communicating on their profile. And, I feel elderly now because that, like, there's so much new social media now based on the research that we did a couple of years ago. But we'll just say, for example, like their profile or their like about me page, a lot of it was in some way, shape, or form, they were talking about being lonely, maybe not fitting in, maybe feeling like there was something different about them, maybe not feeling loved. That was the biggest thing that we saw, was that the individuals who had the motivation to want to contact these kids for potential, hopefully future sexual abuse, was that they were seeing that, of, there's something out there on this kid's profile that they are feeling lonely and unloved. And that is then how, and that's what this article was all about, was how do they contact them, and how do they and then initiate sexual conversations with the purpose of grooming these children to the point of sexual contact.
Why do you think they're attracted to the lonely aspect? Is it because they're just an easier target in general? Because they know that, if they're lonely, that means there's not a lot of people in their life. So therefore, if they went missing, that wouldn't be a huge big deal. Or if something happens to them, there's not going to be many people to tell. Or perhaps they're troubled kids. So even if they did tell someone and no one would really listen to them, or is there a strange connection in the sense that the sex offender also feels that way and therefore finds some sort of connection emotionally there? Or,
I think you're hitting on a lot of important points. One of the things also that I think happens, and the research will support this, is a lot of offenders, especially when they're specifically online and looking for children online, they'll cast a very wide net. So they may send a message to tons and tons and tons of kids, and kind of like almost like throwing spaghetti at a wall, like, see what sticks. But I do think that when they cast this wide net, the kids who then end up responding back or developing some type of relationship are the kids who are on the lonelier side. And I think all the points that you made about not really feeling like they have anyone in their life, or like wanting somebody to talk to, or maybe, yeah, they don't have as much supervision as some of the other kids. So if they were being groomed, or something was going on that was taking up a lot of their time, maybe no one would notice. Or just like what you said, even if someone did try and tell that this happened to them, that maybe they have people in their life who don't really care, who wouldn't do anything about it. So I think that there's so many dynamics that come into play, but I think the ones that you touched upon there are very, very important, and of the top ranking.
yeah. What can you share a story that was particularly hard for you to hear?
I'm not going to share any stories, because everything that I do is confidential, but also in a safe space of in the therapy room and what it is that's being shared is very sacred. And so, no, I'm not going to share any personal client stories, but I will say that if this is something that's of interest to you and you're interested in learning about lived experiences, there are plenty of documentaries out there. I think that, we've had a lot of high profile things coming out in the past several years. So if that's your motivation and that's of interest to you, there's plenty of docu-series and things like that out there where you can listen to people who want to tell their story.
Yeah. Are you allowed when someone tells their story, like, can they, if they cry or if they express some sort of emotion, and if they just started hugging you or something, are you allowed to like respond to that? Or is it very like you have to keep a barrier of like, okay, I'm I'm here to listen, but there can't really be any physical kind of comfort or contact of any kind.
So I'm going to speak just for myself. In the context of therapy, I only do therapy with adults, so ages 18 and up. I have heard lots and lots of stories of abuse, and people do get emotional, and that's perfectly normal. And it would be a little suspect if you didn't. It is totally normal. However, the way that I was trained and my ethics as a psychologist, I do not engage in any type of physical touch or hugging. That's a pretty strict rule for me. That is something that I very, very rarely will ever engage in because there are a lot of dynamics whenever it comes to patient and psychologist. And it's important that we do not blur those boundaries as there already is. I don't want to say it this way, but a power dynamic. And also, too, when people have been abused, and if we get into the realm of sexual abuse, oftentimes they may have boundaries that are very blurred and very confused and issues with attachment. And so I try and be very, very careful around anything like that and also sticking to my ethics code as a psychologist. So that would be very, very rare for me to do anything like that. But I'm comforting in my voice, I'm comforting in my presence, and that's what I can offer.
Do you find it hard for you emotionally to have those conversations with people? Like, do you find that something, for instance, when you're talking to me or you're talking to a friend or you're talking to your coworker, there's a certain way you feel, and then when you actually are engaging or talking with someone who has gone through a lot of trauma, and as you said, there are a lot of things in your own mind that you're going through and steps you're taking in your brain to get your report and all of these things. Do you notice a difference or a shift in how you like, do you feel as comfortable in those situations as you do when you're not in those? Like, obviously, this is your passion, this is what you want to do, but do you feel a distinct change even in your body when you have to switch off between the two
That's a good
different?
question. And that's probably why I do create my schedule in the way that I do create it, and that there are other things or other meetings weaved in, or I've got to go somewhere else. So it's not patient after patient after patient after patient, because that is something that I know is just not a great fit for me. So I do think that subconsciously, yes, there probably is a change between that. But also, I've been doing this for quite a long time. I would say, way back when I was a baby psychologist in training, and these were my very first cases that I was working on, and these were the first times that anyone was telling me about their abuse scenarios. That probably, like, I was probably like highly anxious. I was probably like sweating. But at this point, I've become very comfortable. And also, too, I have a reputation for being known for treating trauma and specializing in trauma because I do EMDR and I'm also certified in brain spotting as well. So
Hmm.
I get a lot of referrals, and normally I already know what I'm walking into, or I have a suspect of what I'm walking into. And even, I mean, this is maybe from doing this for so many years, but oftentimes I will know, or I'll have like an inkling or some type of like gut feeling that someone is going to share with me sexual abuse. Like, I'll know that sessions before someone actually does disclose it. Is just,
Hmm.
I have this feeling.
Is there Do you miss sometimes the more naive way you started out than now?
No, I don't think so because I think now I'm more comfortable sitting with the patient. And I think that w whether they like it or not is sometimes I think maybe that attitude of like, I've heard so much at this point that there's very little that you can tell me that will surprise me, may be comforting for some people. For other people, maybe it might not be that comforting, but I think because I've done this for such a long time, I can sit there with ease rather than as a baby psychologist being very anxious. And then I was probably more self-focused and
Hmm.
worried like, oh my gosh, do they know that I'm nervous? Like, and I'm not fully present with them. So I would say, no, I'm glad that I am much more seasoned now and that I can kind of just sit there and be present and hold the space for them.
Hmm. What is it when you said sometimes that you can know already that you're gonna get to a sexual abuse topic? Are there certain things about people that you can notice that you're like, this person has experienced a sexual trauma
I
that
don't
you
know
can
exactly
pick
what it
up on
is.
easier?
I can't necessarily put my finger on it per se. Um, yeah, I the best way that I can describe it is just like this deep gut feeling that like I already know. But I
Hmm.
I can't articulate that much better.
Yeah, no, I mean that's fascinating. I mean, obviously there's something, but I think it's very interesting what you said about holding space for an individual and how you become a little less self-focused. Because I've wondered if people just become hardened more in their, not intentionally so, but if the more bad stories you hear, the less you feel uh any sort of, it just starts sounding like a record that has kept on going and maybe changes tune once in a while, but after a while it's just kind of the same sound. Do you do you ever have to I ever wonder like does it come a point where sometimes you have to like you're like okay, this is this person's story, like I how do you examine your own heart where it's like you're not just writing all this down with no sort of empathy, I guess, or sympathy for someone, because after a while I would feel like it would just become, and not in a bad way, but if something just keeps on, if you, and especially if you keep on hearing hard things, which for you is its own burden to bear, do you just
Mhm.
kind of, I mean, how do you still have sympathy for different people's situations when after a while it's like they're all starting to sound the same, you know?
For me, I don't think that they sound the same. I think that there's a lot of dynamics that come into play, especially whenever the person tells you their whole story, right? Because that's oftentimes what happens whenever we're talking in therapy is, um, the dynamics about the age that they were or the situation or how it came about or how it happened more than once. So I think that every story is very different and unique. But maybe also too what I had said earlier about, I've heard so much at this point that there's very little that you can tell me that would surprise me may also be comforting, but it also may be an element of being hardened or seasoned as well. So I mean, it could go a couple of different ways, and I don't think that it. I think it's mixed.
Yeah. When it comes to whenever you talk to sexual offenders, is that very difficult for you to do an analysis of a sexual offender? Because obviously they're the ones who have perpetrated a crime against someone else.
It's not as difficult as you would think, I guess, because I'm kind of just walking in, especially whenever it's an evaluation. And this, the most recent ones that I've done have been several years removed at this point. I've kind of stepped away from that particular type of work.
Okay.
But I would say, whenever you're doing forensic evaluations, and at that point in my time, like there's normally no shortage of forensic evaluations that need to be done. And normally it is kind of moving against the clock and trying to make sure that things get done so they can get to court on time so they don't have to be rescheduled. And so there's a lot of different forensic evaluations on your schedule of not guilty by reason of insanity, uh, sexual offender, a is this person malingering? So I think you're moving very quickly through. And so stepping into the evaluation process, again, this person is still a human and you still treat them with dignity. And also too, remember at that point in the game, we're doing a forensic evaluation for the court to consider. So this may be a person who has been there's been allegations, but they haven't been adjudicated and they haven't been
I see.
convicted.
I
So
see.
that's also something to take into consideration too. But as
Yeah.
a psychologist, we're going to, it's very much about data. And so we'll be using various different types of measures. We'll be putting our clinical judgment in. We'll be using standardized tools to guide what it is that we're doing. So you kind of have to take a step back and be a little bit removed and not be emotional whenever it comes to it. So I think that those various different factors all come into play. But I think whenever you're walking into an evaluation like that, you have to keep those things in mind that there's a lot going on.
Are you afraid you'll ever make a mistake?
I normally don't necessarily think about that per se. Um, I feel like I've had some really good training. I've had some wonderful mentors. I have, it's not unusual for me to consult. Like just today, earlier today, I was doing a forensic evaluation and I was like, oh geez, this one is a little tricky. And so it's not unusual for me to consult with very seasoned psychologists who have been doing this for even longer than I have. And I think that you do the best you can and you write that in your report. Like if there's something that you're not sure about, if there's something that is swaying you one way or another, I include all of that in my report. And I think that that's really important that we include that because we're we're never perfect. There may be things that we
Right.
miss. There may be things that we
Yeah.
forget to ask about. Or also too, one thing to remember is I can only go off of the information that is shared with me, and that's really important. And also too, I may evaluate you today and then I may evaluate you a year from now, and while a lot of things may stay similar, there could be some huge things that change too. And so people are always they're very dynamic and things are always changing. And so I wouldn't say I'm necessarily afraid to make a mistake, but I'm just cautious and I try and think about things from various different perspectives and just go off of what I believe is very good training that I've had.
Yeah. No, and it kind of gives me you know, obviously the justice system, and I've interviewed some people who've been in prison before, and they were relating their experiences to me, and there are obviously things that need to be improved. But I think it gives a lot of perspective when you say too that people are flawed also who are trying to enact justice. And so there's this difficulty of doing the best you can is what you're hoping all of these people are doing. Some people don't do that, but other people do. And so the justice system itself, there's a flawness to it because everyone's flawed in it, you know? Um,
Right. And my forensic report will be one piece of a larger puzzle. Like, is
yeah,
there DNA evidence? Are there witnesses? Is there video camera footage? Is there uh, people who are there in person to testify? Are there victim statements? What information do the police have? So there's so many different pieces that come together that my report is one thing that is taken into consideration but is not the end all be all. And I think that that also gives me some comfort too. But
hmm,
when I think in the evaluations that I've stepped into much more now is children who have been sexually abused or there's a question of sexual abuse, and so those evaluations I would say are less high stakes because more than anything else, it's about getting the kids the services that they need, whether that is trauma therapy, whether that's consultation with a psychiatrist, social skill development, anger management. Like it's, and so I have turned towards that and I really am very passionate about doing that type of work now because it's all about getting services for the kids. That's really the bottom line. And that is, if I'm going to do these types of evaluations, I like having it focused on that.
yeah, so that there's something you can do to help.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I can give some really good recommendations on, hey, this happened to you and this sucks, but here are some things that can really help you and put you on a better trajectory so that this doesn't become your whole entire story, that this is a chapter of your life.
yeah. It's interesting to me. You seem to love and have a heart for kids, but you don't want to have any of your own.
Great question. I've known from a very young age, like maybe even middle school, but I definitely knew in high school that I just wasn't interested in having any of my own children. All of my kids will have four paws and a tail.
Is it for a certain reason, or is it just like you don't know?
I've always just known deeply that it wasn't for me. Yeah.
Just the whole process of parenting in general?
I think as I get older and as I watch my friends who are the same age and a little bit older have children, then I'm like, oh, Leah, you made a great decision, because I love sleeping. That's one of my specialties. So, with children, that's
Yeah,
one of the
who
big things that you're
doesn't?
giving up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I like showering when I want. I like picking out my meals and eating what I want when I want. So, I just like having that flexibility. Like, I love to travel. That's a huge part of my job. So, I think that I've always known this gut feeling deep down that I didn't want children. And then as I continue to age, I'm like, yep, for my lifestyle, finance wise, this was the right choice for you, Leah.
Yeah. Do you want to be like, do you want to get married?
So you don't know whether I am already or not.
No, that's true. I don't. I guess maybe I should have asked. It's because you mentioned you come home to your dog. So I was like, well, it sounds like she's single, but I didn't know. So yeah, maybe I should reframe the question. Are you married?
I'm not married.
Okay. All right. For a second there, I was like, she's right though. I didn't ask it the right way.
And that's what I love about being a psychologist is that we are taught to think in such a unique and different way that and I think this is a perfect example of you asked me earlier if I was afraid of making mistakes. I think that's why we have to be trained to ask these questions and not to make assumptions. And we have to be very careful about these types of things.
Yeah, that's
And so
true.
that's just an example of, yes, psychologist thinking and digging deep and assuming or trying not to assume things.
Yeah. Would you like to?
Get married?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I really like the way that my life looks right now. I have a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. I get to do what it is that I want to do. So if there was someone who joined me along the rest of this journey, I wouldn't be willing to give up what it is that I have. It would have to be a relationship that only continues to add more to my life. And that may sound, wow, gosh, she's really narcissistic, but that is what it is that I want in my life because I think that my life is pretty darn good right now. And I only want to welcome things into it that are going to add to what it is that I already have.
Yeah. No, I understand that, and I think it's important that you know what you love to do and to pursue that to the best of your ability, which is what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, until something different comes around, or it seems quite obvious to you that there should be a change, it doesn't make much sense. You want to keep going on the trajectory you're on. Um, but I did, just to kind of wrap up, because I want to be respectful of your time, one thing I've wondered a lot is, and this is something, I mean, I've wrestled with because I'm a Christian, so I have a worldview, right, that there's a God and that man is sinful and that man is capable of wrong. But at the same time, I know that man is also in a fallen world. And so man will be hurt by other people. We will have brains that are broken, which is not our fault. I have anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and there are days where nothing's happening bad in my life, and I could just have a really bad panic attack, or I could just have a
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
hard day. And it's not anything I've done. It's just my brain. It's the way I grew up, it's the wiring that's happened to it. And kind of seeing that the difference of like because there are also people in the Christian community, who are like, oh, it's a sin to have anxiety. And I've had to say sometimes
Oh
very
boy.
distinctly, no, there's a difference. There's a difference between a actual brain malfunction
Mm-hmm.
and an intent to sin. or a sinful thought, so forth. And I've wondered for you, when you're meeting a sexual offender, there obviously is likely a mental component. But how do you kind of at the same time go, okay, but this person also wanted to do this. So there's like this difference of, okay, there's a complete mental problem where this person had no control over what they did, and then there's this aspect of it where they intentionally did this to hurt somebody. They knew they would, but they did it because they wanted to, and they wanted to do it for themselves or whatever reasons they had. Is that something that you've ever thought of or kind of like parsed through of like how does that work between the mental aspect where there is no control and then there's the control where someone's like, "No, this is what I want to do and there's nothing wrong with me. This is what I enjoy."
So I think that this is a very, very nuanced question. So there will be people, if you think about individuals who commit some type of sex crime on a spectrum, there will be individuals who, like you said, the impulse control just simply isn't there. Maybe there's a traumatic brain injury or some type of impulse control disorder where I see something, I want it, that's what I'm going to do. So that's
Hmm,
one end of the spectrum. Then I think another end of the spectrum, or, just thinking about it in a different way, there are a lot of individuals who fall into the category of someone who has committed a sex crime. However, there is some type of developmental delay, I'll call it. And so oftentimes their cognitive abilities or their intellectual functioning, they're outwardly an adult, emotionally, mentally, relationship wise, they may be 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And so they're attracted to children because mentally that's also where they are. So they're
hmm,
connecting with children because that's what they are on the inside. On the outside, they're an adult. And so I think that that's a piece of it that comes along where it's not necessarily right and wrong. And that's also a piece of it too, right? Is depending upon the level of developmental delay or intellectual disability, that right and wrong aren't coming into play because they may not have the capacity to understand right and wrong.
I
And
see.
it's, I'm relating to this person because I'm also on the inside a child. But I'm also having these urges because I'm having these hormones and things like that. So I think that's a piece of it.
Hmm.
So, and there was another piece that I was going to mention here. Oh gosh, how could I have forgotten this? There's a debate. Well, I should say there's a thought, especially within the community of those who offend, that they are born or they are wired with a particular sexual attraction in mind, whether that is, whenever we're talking about age or gender. And so this was something that I came across more specifically when I was working with sexually violent predators, is that is their, and I'm using air quotes for those who are just listening, that is their sexuality. That is what they're attracted to. That is what they've always been attracted to. And so that's also a perspective that is held within the offender community. So that I think that there's so much to parse out, and you could probably do an entire episode just on that question that you asked me.
Yeah. And for you, do you find it less of your job to figure that out as opposed to just
That's
do what you're supposed to do?
right. That's not necessarily my job to figure out because oftentimes the question might be, yeah, whatever the psycho-legal question at hand is, it's not necessarily my job to figure out the motivations behind this, even though like that's what is quote unquote sexy and exciting if you're watching um,
Yeah,
SVU or
true.
a documentary or this or that, oh, like Mindhunter. Okay. But actually, while that might be an interesting thought exercise, that's very rarely what the question actually ever is. It's normally, did this actually happen? Um, if this did happen, what are the ways that we can try and mitigate this? What are
Hmm.
the treatment plans? What are the resources that we can give? So it's oftentimes not what's the motivation. That's almost never what the question is.
Hmm.
It's just more so exciting for television and movies.
I have to say, Leah, this has been fascinating for me, and I'm so grateful and thank you because I know
Oh, yeah,
also for me coming in, this is probably very rudimentary for you, and you're like, but I'm very grateful that you're willing to kind of go down to the bottom level with me and help me understand these
sure.
things. So I'm very grateful. I hope this is interesting for my audience and for those listening. Again, her website will be at the bottom. Check it out. As she said, there's a whole bunch of things that you can look into way deeper than this interview has gone because it's only can be so long. But Leah, thank you again, and I'm grateful for the work you do, and I'm also glad that you have a dog because when I think about it, I'm like,
Yes.
she needs something. Either a good cup of coffee or something to make her laugh and like remember the sun because these it's that's why I'm so amazed by what you do is that I think it's so brave in its own way because it's not something I could do. So,
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and just, it's nice to be asked different questions to think deeply. Because again, I think that I like to keep a very busy schedule. And so sometimes I don't dive deeply into how is this impacting me? What's happening in my body? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? And so I think that it's a nice thought exercise for us to sit down and actually spend some time in reflection, basically.
yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad. I'm glad I could give you a reflective hour.
Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
All right, Leah, thank you so much.
My pleasure.